We ain't winning when we winning. We ain't winning when we winning. We're here at the Hampton National Historic Site. It was the largest plantation in the state of Maryland during the antebellum period. We're here to shoot the first episode of Vestiges of Slavery.
I think this is an important site to start the show off with because we're talking about how the vestiges of slavery show up or manifest in our current society. And this plantation is literally just off of the highway of just modern society. It takes you back to a period that many people don't think about on their daily treks to work or in conversation with their friends, but also at the same time, many people are thinking about how slavery plays a role in our lives. So I think it's important to us to start the episode or start the show off in or on a plantation site as we wrestle with topics and how slavery affects Black people on a daily basis.
For sure, to think about the largest plantation in Maryland being in such proximity to the largest free Black population in Baltimore during the antebellum period, it's only right that we start the series here.
The lower house, also called the farmhouse or the overseer's house, is located down the hill from the mansion. It is the oldest building on the estate, with part of it dating back to 1745. Set next to the lower house, two buildings dating back to 1855, made of local stone, are reminders of enslaved people that lived at Hampton until 1864. Separated from the mansion by Hampton Lane, the buildings on the lower portion of the estate, or the farm side, show how the estate generated income and gives us insight into the lives of the enslaved, overseers, tenant farmers, and others. There were lots of mouths to feed on large plantations like Hampton, and this made corn an all-important crop. Hard or dent corn was used as feed for livestock and grounded into cornmeal for the Wrigley family as well as the enslaved. Most importantly, corn was sold for profit. Built into the surrounding ground and located on top of a natural spring, the dairy kept the estate's milk and butter cool since the 1790s. Workers chilled milk by placing it in sealed stoneware pots that were lowered into the cool spring water. The dairy was also the site of butter production, a source of income for the state.
Welcome to the first iteration of Vestiges of Slavery. I'm Anthony Smooth.
And I'm Alexis Cathcart.
And today we're going to be having a discussion about the concept of vestiges of slavery, why it's important to me, and what we intend to do with the project.
So I'm interested in what you mean by vestiges. What are the vestiges of slavery? Where does this idea come from?
Well, when I was an undergrad taking a science course, I engaged with the concept of a vestigial feature, right? A feature that still exists today, but it doesn't have the same function that it once did. It existed for a need in a different time that we don't need it anymore, but yet it still exists, like your appendix or your wisdom tooth, things like that. And I just started to think about that in a sociological type of way, like, what are aspects of our modern society that are carryovers from a time when it existed that way for a reason, and it doesn't necessarily have to anymore, yet it still does.
Right.
Right. So I thought about experiences that Black people have that are rooted in our history with enslavement, and how some of those things still carry over today.
Right. But this has kind of been I guess I'd say, persistent idea in public history. Like, people have hearkened a bunch of things back to the institution of slavery, whether it be the dehumanization of Black people, whether it be the origins of police or the similarities in the prison system. Like, how has this idea kind of, I guess, in public history changed over time with how people are engaging with the institution of slavery in everyday Black life?
Well, you know, as the discipline of history advances and, you know, public knowledge about things grows, or you know, our understanding of things grow. I think that in the age of technology, ideas permeate faster, and it's a part of pop culture in these ways. You know, in our lifetime, we've seen holidays like Juneteenth be acknowledged, and those roots with slavery, and currently in the social climate with black artifacts, you know, the Smithsonian,
Right.
like it's just a hot topic right now. You know, Nicole Hannah-Jones in 2019 did the piece for the New York Times where she's acknowledging that the first African slaves to a British colony, which would eventually become the United States, right, is in 1619. In 2019, it's been 400 years since then, right? And even before engaging with that project, when you think about enslavement only being abolished with the 13th Amendment under clauses, right, in 1865, you know, civil rights movement, or the classical civil rights movement, as we like to think about it, you know, Civil Rights Act and all this is only 100 years after that, right? So when I think about concepts that other historians are already building on, right, the vestiges of slavery root from, as an extension of the British Empire, African slaves come here for the first time in 1619.
Right.
Emancipation is 1865. It's 246 years that we were enslaved. And then from 1865 to today, it's only about 160 years.
Right.
So to juxtapose those numbers beside each other is to really think about where we are as a people. We have been enslaved here longer than we've been free.
I think too of other scholars who've touched on this, Sadiya Hartman has the afterlives of slavery, of how Black people have been dehumanized or devalued in American society, or how this racial hierarchy has persisted from the institution of slavery. But I also think of perhaps specifically the ways that the institution of slavery has affected the daily lives of Black people, particularly with things like education. Like how, even in my own classes, we talked about the Freedmen's Bureau today and the implications of education after the Civil War. Like, how do you see the vestiges of slavery in the education system nationally, but even more specifically in the South?
Well, you know, currently we're at the Hampton Historic Site. You know, it was the largest plantation in Maryland. You dig, just north of Baltimore City, which had the largest free Black population in the antebellum period. And Maryland, historically, when it comes to secondary public schools, is a high-performing state educationally, you know, compared to other states in the nation. But Baltimore City, specifically, is one of the worst school districts in the nation, right? So that level of disparity, I don't think it's any coincidence, you know, that Baltimore still has a large Black population. And these schools that, you know, are underperforming are disproportionately Black, right? So it's things like that. But then it's things where as though, like, for instance, voting, right? A lot of Black people just don't vote, right? For whatever reason. But historically, we have been excluded from the vote. And it's like, over time, you just don't have the desire to vote. And even regardless of who the presidential candidate is, it's always a debate about the Black vote.
Right.
It's always something that's in contention, something to win, not because the population is so large, but because they so rarely participate that if you could get participation from them, it would be significant. And it's like, they're still having to encourage the vote. You know, you never see another demographic that's like push the vote like that. Like, historically, we just don't engage with the vote.
Yeah.
But we've been deterred historically from it. So it's a lot of carryovers from from
Yeah.
as far as the mentality, ideology, even de facto segregation being a phenomenon that still exists when it's not enforced by the law anymore, but it's just understood in ways. In a city like Baltimore where, affluence is right next to impoverishment.
Yeah.
Like literally,
I think moving from Alabama to here and seeing there's wealth disparity in Alabama, but I even think about the makeup of the South during the, if you want to say, the Civil War era or even the antebellum period, where wealth is concentrated in these places as well, but there's much more enslaved, poor, and working class people in society at that point in that time. And I think moving up the East Coast, like capital is still held within a small portion of society, but I think there's more people with wealth because of industries and slavery in this space. So when moving here, seeing kind of that same makeup and wealth disparities where we have these large pockets of wealth just in this center and they're surrounded by poor and working class people. And at some point it was surrounded by enslaved people, or enslaved people are inside of it. And how that wealth has amassed over time, or how Black people have even been withheld from it or not had it. Like, it still comes from this era when capital is amassed in white hands. It's like how the vestiges of slavery play out and how wealth continues in society, where it's withheld into the hands of a particular group of people. And whether or not people decide to try to move up that ladder, it seems like how these institutions were embedded in society, particularly in the South, still manifest in how Black people are living now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This whole Western Hemisphere was built upon slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, those other institutions have died. When the Spanish Empire was in here on slavery, like, they eventually got that Mexico, gets their independence, they abolished slavery. They don't have slavery the same way.
Mm-hmm.
The French give up the Louisiana Purchase, and, pretty much their time here in the Western Hemisphere is done. Yeah. And then it's the British who get their independence and become America that build their whole economy on slavery.
Mm-hmm.
The whole issue is expanding the institution westward into the places where the French were, into the places where the Spanish were. And it's like, if we're going to go 246 years, it's not just 246 years of enslavement for Black people.
Yeah.
246 years of a country.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Existing off an economic system based on enslavement.
Yes.
And you don't just fully abandon that. You just rebrand it, so to speak. But there's no way you can start over with that. Mm-hmm. These people still occupy the same space in society.
Yeah.
Right. And these people, I mean, Black people. Right. They still occupy the same place in society. And that's the vestiges of slavery.
Right. This is making me think a lot about the class I'm teaching right now, because we literally are in the period of the Civil War and Reconstruction. And I think my argument to them was that in order to understand modern America, we start with the Civil War and Reconstruction, right? And this is most closely, you called it before, modernity's antiquity. Like, this is the oldest probably section or portion of history that we can relate back to that looks very similar to our society today. And I was talking with my students about how what we know as the United States, even after the Civil War, where we have the Union and the Confederacy, that the Union still had enslaved people. They still had slave states within the Union. It wasn't just enslaved people in the Confederacy. There were enslaved people in the Union. And my students kind of engaged with the fact that Abraham Lincoln wouldn't have emancipated anybody if that meant that the Union would stay as one nation. And I kind of was talking with them about that as the sentiment still of the United States. Like, the United States is celebrating 250 years next year. And the base of society is that black people are at the bottom and everything is done at the expense of black people. And this goes back to slavery being that institution that the United States has built itself on. And in a capitalist society, that laboring class, because the institution of slavery was a labor system, this laboring class has to always be at the bottom in order for this small 1% in our nation to have their wealth, or for the United States to even have the capital it needs to become this global power. And it makes me think of, like, when I talk to my students, of just how we understand this moment is really understanding how the United States, as we're getting these Western territories, like you're saying, are engaging with settlers that are moving out and wanting to take slavery with them. Because many of them didn't want slavery out there as well, because they said that it would drive down wages. A lot of white workers said that slavery out in these places would drive down wages, but they also did not want to free enslaved people, because that would also mean more competition in the labor market and drive down wages even more. But I wonder if you think about how, particularly in like the labor system, white workers and even black workers are, this may be more of a question for me as a labor historian, but are pitted against each other in their makeup. Because I think that's a vestige of slavery as well, labor, and how we engage with labor in the country.
Yeah, it's a discussion me and you have had plenty of times, where we see 20th century squabbles in metropolitan areas that are impacted by the Great Migration over jobs, right? On the surface, it looks like a black-white thing, right? But it's all about jobs.
Right.
And if you think about why those white people moved to the Midwest and to the West in the first place, was to get away from a system of slavery that didn't benefit them.
Right.
Most white people don't own slaves, own plantations. You understand what I'm saying? So how can they go somewhere, make something for themselves, and not have to compete with enslaved labor? That's why they didn't want slavery out there. Not because they were just, like, you know, good people, right? Because once slavery was over and the black people came out there for jobs, it was the same energy. That's vestiges of slavery, right? So it's these carryovers over time that are just rooted in things that happened in the past. Yeah.
I think it's even some other aspects of society other than race and education that the vestiges of slavery kind of shows up in, and labor as well. Like, what other aspects of society do you see these vestiges of slavery?
I could think about entertainment, right? If we talk about the history of, like, blackface and vaudeville, and the imagery of black people has always been hyperbolic and, you know, ridiculing in a way, like caricature-like, you know. I feel like in a lot of ways, that's what hip-hop has done to the impoverished black experience, in a way. It's kind of like caricaturized it. These characters who live in the hood and do these things like that.
Right.
And it perpetuates a culture. And it's a culture not owned by us. You know, when you think about blackface, it was black performers who had to do blackface. You get what I'm saying? You think about roles that dominated for some time. Disney's Song of the South. You know, that's made in the 40s. And it's about Uncle Remus, who was this antebellum enslaved man talking about the good old days. Right. So I think about sport culture, right? The avenues in which we are allowed to become wealthy. Right. All of these avenues are not readily available to us. But the things that you might go to a neighborhood that's a food desert, it ain't got no resources, but it's a brand new basketball court up there. You know what I'm saying? The next LeBron James could possibly come out of this basketball court, but maybe not the next brain surgeon. You know, maybe not the next, you know, political leader. And it's not to say that couldn't happen. Right. But it's just more about the probability there's a higher probability that, you know, your next sports star is going to come out of one of these impoverished neighborhoods. And it's because that's what's being nurtured. You know, it's hundreds of kids on a football team, on a basketball team, looking for that opportunity in that way, you know, because it's available, not just, you know, it's real to them.
Right.
You see these people who actually accumulate something by doing this, and that's realistic for you. You go to that school, that person is related to you, whatever the case may be. But then when you look at what it is on a larger scale, it's like, okay, you one guy on a 55-man roster, you know, 12 guys on an NBA roster, whatever. Somebody pays all of their checks. You know, how many of those guys are black? And we getting more, you know, but that's further in a long shot. And most times they had to play that game themselves to amass that money, you know.
Yeah.
But you look at the NFL Combine, you know, when it's draft time and they line all of the guys up and see how fast they can run and measure their wingspan and you know, the size of their quadriceps. The
first time I learned about like measuring the length between like that seemed insane to me. Like learning, I mean, people, I think, especially in like pop culture, have compared the two of just like how athletes have to, I guess that whole experience that they go to of getting like their body measured and stuff like that, like harkens immediately back to slavery, and how, you know, depending on they looking for certain body types and like the strongest slaves or something like that. Like that seems like a apropos comparison, I guess.
And I mean, the NFL, they're equal opportunity employers. You know, there's white guys out there getting measured too.
Sure.
But the thing of it is, it's like, for so many people in the black community who have a kid who he's 6'4", that's the first thing they thinking, like, oh yeah, this is our way out type thing, you know.
Right.
And it's just, and that's okay. I'm not mad at that. But the objectifying of the black body in that way. Right. That the black kids, they big, they fast, they strong. We want to go get an athletic kid. We get one in the hood. You can jump all high, you know. It's still objectification of the black body in that way. And I would say, maybe it's a reach, but that's just slavery. Yeah.
I think the evidence might be there to look at that. But I also think, I think of another book, and Dorothy Roberts of Killing the Black Body. And she kind of gets into, I guess, particularly black women and their objectification too, with the black body. Like, I won't try to rehash the whole book. I might not do it well at present. But of how, even with just the certain medical situations, even the field of gynecology is done with enslaved women against their will, or how their bodies over time, particularly with things like reproduction or specifically birth control, or how black women are, even if we go into, I'm jumping all over the timeline, but look at even the war on drugs and how that particularly affected black women or even black motherhood in that way. Like, these objectification of the black body spans all over the spectrum of black life, from gender to class to, I even think back to when you said something about vaudeville and how media really portrays an image of black people back to black people. And it's not always made by black people, right? And some of them are lasting from this period. But you can help me out with this, with a book by Seth Rockman called Plantation Goods, where one particular aspect that stuck out to me, and I think you know what part I want you to talk about, but one part that stood out to me was particularly the clothes that black people had to wear, certain type of materials that they would wear. But I'm thinking of a particular cartoon that showed how black people wore their clothes. They either had on like mismatched type of attire, their feet were too big for shoes, they had on like a jacket that had a bunch of patches or a bunch of holes, where they were just, for the most part, disheveled and look like what an enslaved person or a black person would look like. And that makes me think of how race is being made over and over again in these spaces of how Black people look like this, Black people talk like this, Black people do these things. And in vaudeville, that seems like another example is this is how the dominant society is viewing Black people. So even when they're enslaved, they're viewing it in some way. When they're not enslaved, they're viewing it in some way. And this is how the vestiges of slavery kind of carries over into Black people are viewed, particularly with the clothes they have on or the music they listen to, based on how the dominant society is viewing them.
You know, you're making me think about so many things. It make me think if I'm from Africa, right, and I don't wear European clothes,
right,
how would I look in my European clothes? Like I might be wearing them crazy. Like I might have my collar all over here because I don't know you're supposed to straighten it up. I didn't wear this stuff. You didn't give me this stuff, right? I'm thinking about the brogans, right?
Right.
And brogans was just generic footwear. Like generic footwear to the point where it don't got no arch, it don't got no shape, no particular size. They sell them one at a time. They don't even sell them in pairs.
Right. Exactly.
And it's like, how you supposed to be flying that? You know what I mean? How you supposed to look in that, right?
Right.
You'd have been working all day. Your feet hurt in these shoes. You probably walking crazy. You probably, now I think about them being big. You probably want them big.
Yeah.
To have some space because they ain't got no shape to them.
Right.
You know? But Seth Rockman's book just talks about how even that North, this perceived free North of the antebellum period that we think about, still indirectly participated in slavery by producing and providing them with the goods that they used, right? The Negro cloth,
that
right?
part,
that really wasn't even a different texture of cloth. It's just marketing. How things are marketed to Black people.
Yes.
Right. Like it's a lot to really process. But I was thinking about you saying these socializations mainly in a male context, and if I think about it in a female context, like the hypersexualization of Black women, right? And it's like these are the things that's promoted with the hip hop as, you know, feminism, you know, but you could harken that back to like Sarah Bartman.
Right. Yeah.
You understand? And the objectification of the Black body, right? And I'm not saying that I have any problem with, you know, the female artists who do that. Like, if that's what you do, then that's fine. But it's just something to wonder about, like, why doesn't Taylor Swift have to do that? You know, why doesn't her femininity look like that? You know, or why doesn't Adele's femininity look like this claiming of my Black body that same way? You know what I mean? And it's definitely rooted in how you say, like, how the dominant culture likes to view their Black people.
Right.
You know? Even if I think about a time in hip hop with groups like Public Enemy and X-Clan and collectives like the Native Tongues who, you know, were wearing the leather medallions and talking about Afrocentricity, you know. There were different variations of hip hop in its infancy that didn't survive till today. And the version that survived to today is the kind that it deifies a lifestyle that perpetuates, you know, violence, you know, promiscuity, you understand? I definitely think those are vestiges of slavery.
Right.
We could expound upon these topics for hours. And unfortunately, we don't have enough time. Right?
Right.
But the way I see vestiges of slavery is a way for me to engage with people in the community, both indirectly through the media and directly with different guests who I bring on, like how me and you are having a conversation. Right. And just have a conversation about these vestiges of slavery that I perceive and get some perspectives from within the community about how they feel about these topics.
I think it'll be cool to have the conversations that people are having literally everywhere in the country in a space where they can engage with people who are studying history at the university, or people who are not in university studying other aspects of history or engaging with topics historically, that I think would be almost, even to sound cliche, it's like unifying in a way to have various episodes of us talking about all of these things that we touched on and how other people have engaged with these topics over time, and even backing it up with historical research or being at historical sites like this to kind of support these topics that we're all thinking about.
Yeah, I'm trying to bring the conversations that the people are having on the bus after Trump says something crazy, or the conversations you have with your auntie or your uncle about back in the day at the cookout. I'm trying to intellectualize that, you know, and really dive deep into what these things are rooted in. Well, I thank you for your time today, Miss Alexis.
Thank you.
This has been the first episode of Vestiges of Slavery.
We'll see y'all next time.
Peace.
Will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
We ain't in winning when we winning.